Benjamin Elijah Mays once said, "I believe everyone was born into the world through something unique and distinct." Our host has been fortunate enough to have opportunities which allowed him to discover and fulfill his unique purpose. Unfortunately, every young person has not had those same opportunities. Expanding how we understand education, building community, impacting and improving lives, promoting HBCUs, and encouraging lifelong learning. Dean Talk brings together a variety of scholars, community and business professionals, along with student leaders to discuss topics which are critical to improving educational equity and equality. Welcome to Dean. Now, your hosts are Wayne.
Hello, everybody. How is everybody doing? I am very excited about tonight's conversation. We have some amazing guests on. Thank you, everyone who's watching. Thank you to everyone who will watch. Please share this live so that we can expand the number of people that we are reaching. I am excited. I want to share a couple of things. So, of course, tonight we're having a Black History panel. We're going to talk Black history, lots of things and lots of thoughts and insights regarding Black history. And so I'm glad to have our panelists on. A couple of things I want to make sure I thank our sponsors, Java 365 Coffee and JK808, who does all of the music for Dean Talk and Coffee Chronicles. So Black History Month. Most of you know I'm the great-grandnephew of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who is considered the father of Black history, the founder of Black history, whichever title you decide to use. And so whenever we're talking Black history, I am excited. I get very emotional and engaged in the conversation. But a couple of things. One, we know when Black History Month was founded. It was founded as Negro History Week. We know it was expanded. But what I always like to make sure people know is that the original intent was not to relegate our history to 1 week. It was to study all year long and then celebrate what we had learned during that week. So along those lines, I am going to share a video with you, and then I will be right back after this.
Hello! Black History Month is a commemoration, vocab word, for Black activists, another vocab word, who took their time out to go fight for what they feel is right. Like Martin Luther King had a speech that violence is not the answer and no segregation. We celebrate Black people that helped us change history. It reminds us to be strong, even in politics. What matters is what's inside of you and how you act to other people.
Doesn't matter if you're Black, if you're white, just always celebrate it because you know the struggles Black leaders went through in order for you to be here right now.
Even though we may have the different skin color, we're still the same type of people, no matter what.
And a lot of people, they don't see me for who I am. They see my outside appearance, but they don't see what I have on the inside.
It's very hard to grow up knowing that you're Black and you have a lot of personal prejudices against you.
I see it on the TV and I'm like, is that going to happen to my brother? Is that going to happen to my dad? I always have that in the back of my mind every time that I'm home and they're not home.
Black history is important to me because I have to remember where I came from and I have to remember who came before me.
Because you have to look at the things that Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X did for us Black people, so people can't treat us unfairly because they think some type of relief. Because we are all people, and you need to stand up for our rights.
There's still discrimination. There's still discrimination in all parts of the world, in all parts of the United States. We should still fight for what we believe in. We should still fight for getting what's right.
So I always like to share that video because it's important to me that we extend our knowledge of Black history beyond ourselves and make sure that our young people have a point of history. Like the young man said, it is hard being Black and knowing that there is prejudice against you. So it's important that we have these conversations. So without further ado, I am going to bring up my amazing panelists, and then they're going to introduce themselves, and we are going to get right into this conversation. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Dean Woodson.
How are you all doing this evening?
Good, thank you.
So we will start with Dr. Moore. Why don't you introduce yourselves to our viewers today?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for participating. My name is Dr. Erin H. Moore. I have my master's and my doctorate in African American Studies. I received my doctorate from Temple University. I'm a former professor of history and African American Studies at Central State University, and also I was an adjunct at Spelman College. And right now I own my own educational consulting business. I teach advanced level African American Studies courses to adults. I do some diversity, equity, and inclusion training, and through that work, we're also working to help develop curricula for a lot of charter schools throughout the country. So I'm very pleased to be here.
And Dr. Gilliam, how are you?
I'm great.
Next.
How are you?
I'm wonderful.
I'm Dr. Erin Gilliam. I am an associate professor of history at the Kentucky State University in Frankfort, Kentucky. I am a Kentucky State graduate as well. An HBCU advocate. I try to make sure that everything that I do, everything that I am, I celebrate my Blackness. I celebrate who I am, where I come from. I'm the new dean of the Whitney Young Honors College as well at Kentucky State University.
Congratulations on your appointment. I don't know if congratulations or what we should say.
We'll see.
Say congratulations. Dr. Mason.
Yes, sir. I am Dr. Herman Skip Mason Jr., a proud graduate of Morris Brown College, also Atlanta University, now Clark Atlanta University, where I received my master's in African American Studies and Library Science, and a graduate of ITC, where I received my Master's of Divinity and Doctorate of Ministry in Church History. So I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much for having me. I currently serve as pastor of West Mitchell Street CME Church and also the director of libraries at Voorhees College. And shout out to my dear friend, Dr. M. Christopher Brown, president of Kentucky State, one of my very best friends in the whole wide world.
Mine too.
Amazing work. Amazing work. I love his interview.
Yes.
Whenever he does the interview, I love it. So thank you all for being on this evening. So I'm going to start at the beginning by prefacing with this topic with, for some reason, we start our Black History study in 1926. Now, we know part of that is because, Dr. Woodson didn't have access to things beyond that. So what are your thoughts on that? How do we begin to get people to think beyond the slavery period that we were before we got here? So let's start the conversation there. What are your thoughts?
I think about that as you say that, Dean Woodson, and I'm like, because it's always been very important to me. I teach Intro to African American History. We were having a conversation before the show started. I teach History 108, Intro to African American History. Every student passing on Kentucky State University's Hill has to take the class. So regardless of your major, you have to take Intro to African American History. And that is an initiative under Dr. Brown. And I wanted to make sure that history never started as that we are this history of slaves or the enslaved, that we are so much more. So I start in Mali. I start with the story of Mansa Musa. And most of us who grew up with parents who exposed us, we've heard of Mansa Musa. But when you get into these classes, and you have these children who have never taken an African American history class, and they took that one American history class in their public school education, and they hear Mansa Musa, who's the richest man in the world, who was a Black man, who looked like you and he looked like me, that's where I start. And I'm not starting on a plantation. I'm not starting on a ship. I'm starting in Africa, where it began and where it ends.
I like to second that. I do the same thing when I taught my courses. Having gone to Temple, we're all, everything that we did was being African centered. So that's the whole perspective that we bring to the table. We go all the way back. We do the Great Kingdoms, but we even, root our studies in Kemet. I do some of, which is ancient Egypt. I start my courses with that as well. But I also start with the beginning of human history, the beginning of humanity. The first humans that were ever discovered, the first Homo sapiens were in Africa. So all history begins with Black history. All human history begins with Black history. So we talk about that. We trace through Kemet, through the Great Kingdoms. But it's not even just the kingdoms. The culture and the values of African people, I think, really have to be taught. A lot of times when we teach history, we talk about, this leader and that leader and these queens and that queen and those kings. But there's a certain level of genius and intelligence and science and mathematics that African people have that they bring to the table that we're not really teaching. This whole idea that we're inferior when we have so much science and so much intelligence. We had our own methods of democracy. You know what I'm saying? We had gender balance between men and women. We had a balanced, harmonious relationship with the natural world. We didn't kill off all the animals. We live in Africa with all of these animals. We didn't slaughter them. So there's a certain set of values and ethics and morality that I really think that we really need to bring to the table in terms of teaching our history and our culture.
I concur. I taught history at Morehouse for 7 years. Freshman history, history of civilization, 111, 112. It's a required course. And so we start with, the history of mankind from a humanistic approach. I think that is important. But what was required, and I don't want to, totally dismiss the 400 years that we have been enslaved, both physically, mentally, spiritually, etc. Because even if you start at that point, you still have to come through slavery to get to freedom. John Hope Franklin. And if you teach modern history, you have to go back through slavery in order to understand how we got here. And I know that, and I'm picking up an echo. I don't know whether anyone else is, but hopefully we can work that out. But at any rate, I agree. We have to grapple with slavery. All right. We can't brush it, push it up under the rug. We have to deal with it because it has had the most impact of our being right now. And I know I've had students who have said, I don't want to see another slave movie. I get that. I understand that it's very painful, but it is absolutely necessary. What I did is to make it even more personal. All of my students over the last 10 or 12 years that I was at Morehouse had to do their own genealogy project. And they had to find that enslaved ancestor. And it changed their own perspective of the whole story of African Americans enslaved because they could identify with one in particular. So yeah, it is painful. We were prominent and prosperous in Africa, but that slave issue still has to be dealt with as we look at holistically the history of African Americans.
I fully agree. And so let's just delve into this. How do we do that? I have heard those same things, Dr. Mason. Like, I don't want to see another slave movie. I have met mentees that have never even seen Roots, have no point of reference for anything. And then, I have talked to older people who refuse to even have that conversation with this next generation.
Yeah.
So with my 3 people here, how do we begin to incorporate that into the discussion with our young people?
I just want to be clear. I don't think anybody who is in the scholarship, who's in academia, or anybody who cares about the culture would definitely dismiss or brushed over or not want to have a conversation about slavery. I think that when we talk about the African American journey, and we talk about that, of course we have to talk about slavery. But what I think is important to understand is that when you are in I taught K through 12 before I got the PhD and taught in higher ed. But when you are in a public school setting and all you hear is Harriet Tubman and then Martin Luther King, I think it's important that our children, especially when they come to an HBCU and have an HBCU experience and have a professor that looks like them, is that they get to understand that slavery is, of course, a part of the story, but it is not the beginning of the story. So many times in this country, our children are led to believe that our history starts with slavery. So I don't think anybody would dismiss or not. I mean, we've written dissertations, had classes, we can talk for hours, and we know that our strength and how we have survived today in systemic racism comes from the strength of our ancestors. But we also have to be very clear that our children are not having this story of that their African American history started with slavery. I think that's what Dr. Moore and Dr. Moore, I'm not trying to speak for you, but I think that's the energy we were going for.
Well, there's no dispute. There's no dispute. I'm just simply saying from my vantage point that slavery is necessary. It is important that we discuss it. I am a product of roots. I'm the little kids, Dean Woodson, that was in the video in 1977, 14 years old. My ninth grade teacher said, Skip, I want you to watch this miniseries called Roots and keep a journal. I knew nothing about African ancestry. I didn't know anything about slavery. I just knew my grandparents. And I watched that and it turned my life, watching the story of Kunta Kinte to Alice Haley. So how do we make an impact was your question. We start very early. We teach them the importance of their current history, their ancestral history that leads through slavery and back to Africa, but I am just a strong proponent because I'm a genealogist too. And I spend a lot of time and I see how that period has so distorted our people because of connection. Us genealogists, we are a strange breed of people. Okay. I'll get off of this show and I might spend the evening on that, ancestry, trying to figure out a relationship of a match of a cousin whose ancestor was my ancestor's brother, sister, separated in slavery. And now we're trying to figure that piece out. So I agree with you, Dr. Gilliam. I'm not saying we got to stay in that period from 1619 to 1865. I'm just simply saying that we can't avoid it.
No, I agree.
Yeah, we can't avoid it, that it has to be a part of the narrative, painful as the subject, may be. And I think it helps us to appreciate the great work that you scholars are doing when you're teaching about the history of African civilizations, that we can connect, those dots.
Dr. Woodson, I think that question is extremely important. And let me just say, am I giving the feedback here?
I hit mic cancellation on the program, so you're fine.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry about that. And I think we're at a really interesting point in our history as educators and with African American studies, because what's happening right now is you have school systems all over the country who are clamoring for this information. They need help with just devising curricula. They need help with textbooks. They need help with doing curriculum audits, and this is some of the work that I and other, consultants are doing, because you find that the publishing companies, the Pearsons, the McGraw-Hills are not making these age-appropriate textbooks. So what we have to do in our scholarship is really take this very complex and very, sensitive subject matter and really make it age-appropriate. How do we teach it from the elementary school level? What are we teaching specifically in first and second grade? What are some of the more positive, life-affirming things that kids can get when they're younger? Then we've got to start hitting some harder subjects when we get into middle school. Then by the time we get to high school, we get to some of the real nitty-gritty aspects of slavery and oppression. And I think what's really interesting about our discipline of Black Studies is that what we have the opportunity to do for our communities is really use our history and our discipline as a problem-solving mechanism. Because, back in the day with the Black Panthers, they were saying our schools are not teaching us to solve our own problems. And what our discipline has the opportunity to do is say, okay, let's look at this problem within our community and how do we solve it? Let's look at the criminal justice situation that a lot of our young people are in, and let's try to address that problem. How do we look at that historically? Let's talk about environmental racism and why our neighborhoods are so messed up. Why is it that the garbage dumps and the trash dumps are on our side of town? So let's look at that from a historical and sociological perspective. So especially when we get to high school years, the discipline really has the means to not only just teach our history, but give our kids some serious skills in terms of critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, looking at public policy, looking at laws. So it's more than just a linear march through time. It's real important that we do that, especially when they're younger. But by the time we get to high school and college, we really have the opportunity to take our discipline and use it to really address some of the critical issues that our communities are facing.
And I think you make a very good point, Dr. When I went to the academic magnet high school in Detroit, we didn't have any African-American history classes in the entire curriculum.
Oh, my.
They pushed European history. They pushed British history, all of that, even our AP class, everything. And I don't think, and I pretty good memory, that I had any impact of African-Americans in that entire experience.
Wow.
So when I got to Morehouse, it was a culture shock for me. You know, African-American history, and I'm like, okay, my parents had me watch Roots. They did what they could. I mean, I have my family, of course, but that portion had been completely eliminated from the curriculum. So I think that you're all bringing up very valid points that we have to develop that interconnectedness through the whole experience, because we leave out chunks, then we get some of the outcomes that we're getting right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's a very good point, which leads into the second part of this. So how do we begin to move that narrative to today? How do we begin to get even our college and high school and middle school students to where they feel that this is a part of them and not just something that we relegate to February? You know, we're big now, and I just told the person earlier today, you know, Black is in this month. But, you know, come March 1st.
I'm still in.
I'm in as well.
Yeah.
But for some reason, like this,
No,
even within our own communities, like gets put on this back burner, and, you know, we start thinking about February 2022.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we begin, even ourselves, to incorporate this to our daily lives?
Well, the only way you're going to do it, you really have to cancel out Black History Month.
That's a good point.
Wow.
And then there is no specific month that you celebrate it. You change the mindset so that we celebrate it. You know, you and you know me. You know you're gonna find me in my Blackness. Okay, I'm gonna have a dashiki on. I'm gonna have some around my neck because it just makes me feel, you know, embraced. And so we have to change the mindset. And it starts in the home. It should, but sometimes the home may not be able to provide the necessary kind of support. And so we depend on the school system. We depend on woke school teachers. You know, God forbid that you still have students going to schools where there is no, well, I know that's the case because my son attended a school. He only attended it for a year because we yanked him out of there. They didn't even observe Black History Month. It was a great school. But I said, what kind of foolishness is this? And why do I have my son of all people in a school where they don't even observe Black History Month? I said, this is absolute foolishness. And so,
Dr. Mason,
yes,
that
ma'am.
is me.
That's you.
I have a second grader, and I remember looking for schools, and I was like, well, I remember asking a particular school, well, how do you celebrate Black History Month? We talk about Martin Luther King. I heard that from 2 different schools in Central Kentucky. So of course I finally decided on another school, and they're not all extremely inclusive or culturally competent, but it was like the lesser of the, and I think about those type of things. And here we are out fist up, teaching it every day. And then we struggle. I struggle as a mom, as a Black mom to two Black girls who I want to celebrate every day. But here I struggle if I send them to this school. But I want to send them to this school where I have to pay, but then is she the only Black girl in the classroom? So then I'm in the stage where, well, I got to make sure that if she's in dance or she plays soccer, that we drive back to this side of town. And we think about those things as Black parents, but also more as scholars too. Because think about the child whose parents aren't thinking that. And I think about, for me, the Black experience and the Blackness is important because, like you, Dr. Woodson, I went to a fairly strong academic high school, but I never took an African American history class ever. My parents made me watch Roots. I had to read. My daddy made me read Malcolm X. So I read the classics and I read the books, and I remember I dressed up as a Black member of the Black Panther Party. So my parents made sure I was exposed for Halloween one year. But I never took a Black history class until I got to it. Till I went to undergrad at HBCU.
Wow.
And that was option. That's at 18, 19. And think about, as a Black woman, and I'm getting ready to go into the world. I'm going to spend these 4 years, which are the greatest 4 years, and probably my only experience where I'm not going to be the only one in the boardroom, the only one in the classroom, the only one in this setting. And I've never been exposed to my history. I've never been exposed into my culture until I got at this HBCU.
Wow.
And think about our kids who are going to these PWIs or even HBCUs who don't offer or don't require African American history courses or courses about slavery and things like that. And now they're getting ready to go out in the world at 22 and experience life yet again, as always, as the only one. And they're going to experience these racial microaggressions, racism, not even microaggressions, just straight up racism.
That's
and
right.
Not even realize that you are sitting in it and didn't even get to know who you are and whom you come from.
You know, Dr. Gilliam, think about all the people that don't even get the chance to go to college.
Yeah.
Or to go to an HBCU. So they're not even exposed to that. And one of the things, I'm not a parent, but one of the things that we as the community and parents, we have to start doing is we have to really start holding our school boards to task.
We do.
We're going to have to start going to these school board meetings. You know, people say, well, we don't have time to make a new class. Well, you know, you can do project-based learning. There's all sorts of things that you can do. We just can't afford to listen to these excuses that these school systems use anymore. You need to, you know, we got to lobby our superintendents. We got to get with these textbook publishers. There's a whole set of things that our schools, especially you're in a city like Atlanta. You know, Kentucky, bless your heart. We all know Kentucky with all the stuff y'all got going on in Kentucky with your political representatives. But it doesn't matter. Wherever we are, we need to have representation in our public schools. Because you know what? These are our tax dollars. We're paying for this curriculum. We're paying for these teachers. You know, we're a significant proportion of public school students. So they have got to begin to create curricula that really addresses our needs as students.
And I just want to bring attention to Dr. Lovelace. She's at Philander Smith, and on here where she's saying that Little Rock has a bill in committee to ban the teaching of the 1619 project.
Shameful.
And so now they are legislating so that we can't educate people. And we all know why that is. I mean, you know.
Yes.
You know, if you keep people ignorant, then you can also keep them under control.
Absolutely. Say that.
You know what? You don't have to teach the 1619 project. There's other ways you can teach Black history. So if they want to be specific that way, we can counter that bill.
Yeah, you know, it's funny when I hear, you know, I spent a lot of my early professional career in the nonprofit world in non-African American situations, clearly. You know, I was always a Black person in the room, and it amazes me that people can just open their mouths and say things like, oh, I didn't know your people were that smart. Or I'm so surprised that you were able, okay. You know, I wasn't as reserved as I am now. I was a little more militant, you know. I had just come out of Morehouse, and I was really, really a Morehouse man. But
oh Lord.
But as you said, those aggressions and microaggressions, and without a foundation of who you are, those things can have, as Dr. May said, long-lasting negative implications.
Yeah.
And we see that now with just the detachment from some of our young people in their 20s, just this complete detachment from where we are.
Yeah.
So how do we teach Blackness? How do we? Is that even possible?
Well, you said exposure, and kudos to your parents for exposing you. It
Mhm.
begins with exposure. Now, of course, you said you got a real awakening when you got on the college campus. But thank God for exposure. Thank God for the parents who get it, for the mothers who put books in front. I came up, I think I'm a little older than most of you, but I came up during the era of World Book Encyclopedias in the early 70s.
I had a
I sat on the floor, because I was asking my mother questions. And then she got me the Johnson Publishing African American collection. Then she would take me to the library, and I was just soaking it up, like a sponge. But I still didn't know a whole lot about my family. I was not able to make the connection. Roots helped me, and so how do we use technology? These kids have Instagram, they got TikTok, they have old folks on Facebook. My kids tell me the old folks on Facebook.
Yeah.
Okay. But there are different ways to expose. Now, all children cannot live in a household where they grow up with dead relatives on the wall like my children did. God bless them. And a family trip was driving to the country to cemetery so we could do some grave searching. I get that. But how we do this, I think, is to be consistent. Dr. Moore, getting with the Board of Education, demanding changes, in the curriculum and textbooks, all of these things, and sometimes just sitting these kids down in front of a documentaries. They may not get it, they may not like it, but at least they're being exposed to it. And let me say that the great president of Kentucky State, Dr. M. Christopher Brown, is watching the show. He just sent me a text. And so I wanted to shout out to him. And I know he's doing great. And he promised to bring me to Kentucky State to say something. And I'm waiting for that. Huh?
Lunch on me.
Lunch. I look forward to it. Last thing, Dr. Woodson. And I used to use this with my kids in terms of mathematical equations. Learning your ancestors through math. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 great-great-grandparents, 32 great-great-great-grandparents, 64 great-great-great-great-grandparents, 120. And the mathematical equation. I mean, when I share that with my children, their eyes buck wide open. I say, all I'm doing is simple math, doubling the numbers. And this is how many ancestors you are a part of. Go back 7 generations, 522, 8 generations, 1,044. So it's all kind of ways to skin that cat.
Now, I did take some comfort. I guess I should have been because of the movement, but I took some level of comfort in the Black Lives Matter movement last summer because I was impressed with the diversity of the people out there in terms of age, in terms of demographic. And I'm really focusing today on, our people. But I saw young people out there, some of my mentees were in these movements across the country. They're in their 20s and 30s. And I said, okay. And now here we are. And, we're not out there protesting now, I guess, because it's So why have we allowed this shift where if there is not a major movement, we don't impact what's going on?
Ooh.
We get a movement together, we jump, like I tell people all the time, we'll jump on a train after it's taken off, but we probably not going to get on at the station.
Dr. Woodson.
That's good.
I think that's another issue we have to confront in Black studies, that as a people, we're just movement people. We don't do anything unless there's a movement. Well, when we really get to the deep heart of African American studies, we are constantly in movement. We are constantly organized. I've worked for nonprofits as well. People say, what do y'all, Black people don't ever do anything. Right now, there are community organizations confronting the issues that plague our community right now. There are private organizations, public organizations, nonprofit organizations, political active organizations They may not get the publication, the publicity. They may not get the kudos. We've got our fraternities and sororities that are out there being involved. So I think sometimes we get caught up in the
movement,
the moment of the excitement, the thrill. But after Black Lives Matter, we got to keep, and this is the genius of Stacey Abrams. You got to take that energy and work on voter registration.
She shifted a
You got to take
Yeah.
that energy and use it. And I think sometimes what happens in our movements is that we at least more current movements, we don't really take that energy. That was the genius of the civil rights movement. They had grassroots people all over doing the work. And, we celebrate the Martin Luther Kings and the Rosa Parks. But, the genius of the Montgomery bus boycott were all those Black women who said, we are going to walk for a year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're going to walk for a year.
Right.
And we're going to walk 5-10 miles. And we're not going to put it with your foolishness on the bus. And the genius and the commitment and what that took for our people to do that. We have all these unsung heroes that we don't really talk about. So we have to lift up our heroes and sheroes for sure. But I think as long as we continue to say that this is the only people that can ever achieve, who've ever done anything, we kind of miss the mark. We miss the people who are doing this groundwork, who made it possible for the Rosa Parks, who made it possible for Martin Luther King, who made it possible for all of these educators. These people that right after Reconstructions are going down south and starting Black schools.
Yeah.
I mean, those people they were brave, they were committed. They may not have had, just think about what those people had to do in terms of creating Black schools, that some of them still exist today. So we really have to kind of talk about the people in our own communities who've done that work, your family members who've done that own work. Talk to your elders. And you'll find out, you're like, oh, I didn't know that you participated in a sit-in. They're like, oh, the things that our people have done.
Yeah.
That, we already know that there's a whole barrier that a lot of our elders don't want to talk about our past because of the pain of what they went through. My grandfather was one of the first Blacks to get his PhD in education from George Peabody College, which is now Vanderbilt University. And he had to sit in the kitchen by himself with the Black kitchen staff. He could never eat in the cafeteria. He had to have a one room. He was married. The family was back in Arkansas. He was in graduate school. He had to, even when he graduated, in terms of how you walk through the university with your robes, they wouldn't allow him to walk with all the other graduates. He had to walk by himself. And how he had to be by himself. He had a one room. He couldn't live in the dormitories with the other students. So, all of those things that our elders have gone through, that the sacrifices that they made, we don't even know what they have done. So we've got to really, talk about, if we want to lift up our people and how we move through slavery, how we move through Reconstruction, how we move through Jim Crow, is because some of the people in our own families bore the torch. They suffered it. What was it like for our elders to live through Jim Crow? They don't want to talk about it, but because they did it, we're here where we are right now. So I think Dr. Mason, in terms of the genealogy project, I think that's key in really understanding that our own family members, our own families are full of heroes and sheroes. Just because we survived it,
Right.
And that's the kind of thing we got to talk about. It's like, your own family member, you're here because somebody in your family made a choice. And you have to celebrate that choice that your family member made because you're here.
Yeah.
Dr. Gilliam?
I was just going to say that, but isn't that also a reflection of who's telling the story in the sense of the narrative and who's writing the textbooks? Because when we think about the modern civil rights movement, my history advisor, Dr. Gerald Smith, he always told me it's the modern civil rights movement. It wasn't just, it's a watershed. It wasn't just this moment that happened all of a sudden in the 1950s. Before the modern civil rights movement, there were the streetcar movements in New Orleans and Alabama, the train movements in Louisville. And so when we think about these movements and we think about these earlier movements of 1920s and we think about Plessy versus Ferguson and we think about these movements, I don't think that it's just now all of a sudden media sees it. Mm-hmm. And this is what's being written in our textbook. Hey, Harriet Tubman, boop, 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 boop. Now Martin Luther King, and now President Barack Obama. You know what I mean? And so I think that we have to control the narrative of the curriculum and what's being told. And when I think about my students who, when I see this Black Lives Matter movement, and I went out there with them, and I saw what they were doing. I'm 45 minutes from Louisville. I went out there with them, and I saw what they were doing, and they're living in this. I understand. And what I saw was students who had been listening, students who had heard not only me but people talking to them. They had a school that supported them, that made sure they had what they needed as they went on these front lines. And I think that we have kind of made this story of this big movement system. But as Dr. Moore said, we've always been in motion. I ask my students in class when we're talking about slavery, who were the first abolitionists? They, of course, they yell out the Quakers, the church, the white church. I said, no. The first abolitionists were us. Black people were the first people that fought to abolish slavery. So we have to make sure that we're in control of our history, in control of the story, the narrative, the curriculum. And I think that because of how history is recorded and how we have to get out of those linear, that's on us as historians and as scholars. We have to get out of these linear and these points and this dichotomy, because we've always been moving. Now, of course, we have peaks and highs and lows, but I'm sure that Dr. Mason, Dr. Woodson, Dr. Moore, you and I could all sit here and talk about that every day. I'm sure we wake up with a purpose, moving who we are as Black people and moving our people in a direction that is greater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that question came about because a student that is a mentee of mine actually asked me that question. My upbringing was a little different. I was Woodson, just everything was Woodson. I mean, we went to all these events. We went to all these, everybody who had an opening anywhere in the country, they wanted my family there. And I think what that did for me was really sour me to history in general. And even to our history, because at that young age, that started when I was like 5 or 6. I had no point of reference what was going on, except that I was bored out of my mind. People sing these things and all these people just be enamored, and I had no point of reference at all. And so my mentee asked, well, how do we shift the way that we look at this? And I was like, what are you talking about? You're like,
that's 20. A good question.
And exactly. And it caught me off guard because I didn't have an answer. I still don't really have an answer, which is why I think this conversation is important. Because, and I was talking to Dr. Moore before the video, I don't think that we do a good job of preparing the next generation. Mm. Which leads me into my next, area for this conversation. I think, as when we were in Augusta, Dr. Mason always made sure anytime I called him to come speak to the students, he was there. But all of us don't have that same dedication to our people. Now, I don't expect everyone to drop what they're doing and, live a life of poverty and all of that. But I think that we can all contribute better. We have churches. They are doing the same thing the general population does in many cases, which is February, we're all going to have our Black history displays up and all, and we'll shift it. So what do we do as the leaders in this field and the leaders in the community to start really, and I hate this word because it just bothers me, but indoctrinate the next generation so that they can take over? Because like you said, it's a continual process. And if we drop the ball, we see what's already happening in our communities.
That's a very good question. And as it relates to you had to grow into your understanding of your historic and rich lineage and the name that you bore. You weren't expected to understand that at the age of 5 or 10 or even 15 for that matter. But as you grew older and you gained more knowledge and understood the context of the name and the entire story, certainly you gained greater pride and a sense of pride with that. So that's what we have to do. It's a process. Okay. It's evolving. It's continuous. all the time we're moving. Sometimes you can teach students, you all have taught students, and you just don't know whether they get it or not. All right. But something that you've said, something that you poured into them stuck with them over the years. It may not have manifested while you were teaching them in class or whatever the setting was. But what we have to do is to be consistent. That was what we talk about movement. Movements is about consistency. Sometimes movements are about removing the emotion. I love the analogy about the women who said this movement not to get on that bus is worth it. And so we have to get blisters on our toes. We are going to walk to our jobs or to have the men take us. It's consistent. It's removing the emotion and understanding the bigger picture. And I think that's been the success of Black folks, is that whenever we've achieved, we've understood the big picture. Now, we've had a lot of movements. We've had the Black Lives Matter. And when there was that period of violence with George Floyd, we saw a new group of young people get involved in it. They may not have fully understood the full context. They were operating out of emotion and out of anger, but yet they were involved. They were in the streets. They were marching and chanting. They were a part of the movement. All right. And movements don't last forever. Or let's put it this way. You may have a movement. It'll stop. It'll get quiet and silent. And then there will be something that will stir up. All right. We saw the most recent movement during this last election when people voted in record numbers. And being a Georgia boy, Georgia born and bred, and when I die, be Georgia dead, we saw people vote like they have never voted before. Numbers that surpass when President Obama was up for election. It was a movement. We had leadership. It was clearly articulated, and we control, Dr. Gilliam and Dr. Moore, as you both mentioned, the narrative. We have to control the story, and we have to control our narrative. And I just want to share this quick proverb that I used to have committed to memory, and I love it. It's a Nigerian proverb. It says that until the lions, hold on just a second. It says that until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. It just depends on who's telling the story. All right. And that's why, our kids got to talk. They got to ask questions. They got to sit down with the elders. They got to record. Imagine my colleagues, if I'd had a cell phone 30 some years ago, 40 some years ago, when I was researching my family history and riding on Greyhound buses to the country to talk to elderly relatives. In this phone here, I can record, I can take pictures, I can do all these things. So everything they need now, we just have to empower them to do it and to have these conversations. And then somewhere down the line, I think it's going to click.
Dr. Moore, Dr. Gilliam, any thoughts?
I think about, as Dr. Mason and Dr. Moore have said, that how do we get the next generation to carry the torch? How do we get them to go into education? How do we get them to be activists? Dean Woodson, you said that, kind of when we talk about African American history or being committed to the work 120%, we can't take a vow of poverty. We still have, responsibilities, and I still have student loans. And so I think about those things, and I think about how we can get our students engaged and get, not our students, but our people, us, wanting to be the torchbearers of history. And then Dr. Mason, you had said, or I can't remember if Dean Woodson, you also said it. It starts with us. I know for me, I have a PhD in African American history, but in the Black community, I am booked the month of February. From every Thursday to Sunday, someone's inviting me to their church, their organization, their sorority, their fraternity, mine included. You know what I mean? So we have to get out of the box, that when we're just not inviting the Black scholar, she got a PhD in Black history, we're not just inviting her in February.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I certainly understand.
But we have to start there.
But Dr. Gilliam, I used to say it's a real piss poor historian who can't make a few dollars during the month of February.
No books.
Look, back in the day, that money carried me a long way. And this was before virtual. This was before, Zoom. I look forward to February. I said, somebody's going to invite me to their Negro church. And I'm going to tell the same story that I've been telling for the last 15 years and get me a nice little check and go to Piccadilly.
And get a good dinner.
And Longhorn and get me a steak and celebrate. And so it is what it is. I know I feel the angst too sometimes. Facebook has been flooded, and I've been guilty of flooding posts and pictures and all of that. And so it is. I love what you said, Dr. Woodson, that it was intended for us to study all year and celebrate in February. That paints a whole different perspective to it. So we need to continue to study and celebrate all year long.
And you know what? I'm sorry, Dr. Moore, go ahead.
Just a couple things. One, I'm not too worried about this younger generation. We tend to harp on the millennials, but I see a level of activism in a variety of areas with these young people that they're not putting up with adult foolishness anymore. They're not listening to the lies and excuses for why things why things are the way that they are. And I think they're really looking for change. But one of the things that I done in my teaching and my consultancy work, and maybe this is something that we can think about doing on a larger scale, is like each month just make it a theme. February could be love. March could be let's talk about the family. April, let's talk about education and young people. Let's have a month just for Black teens. God knows our poor Black teenage, those are the ones we need to really be concerned about. Yeah. There's a lot of things that our young teenagers in particular are dealing with. Let's talk about this whole social justice, criminal justice reform. Why are we considered criminal? Let's go back. Were we criminals in Africa? Did we have jails and prison in Africa? No. So there's a whole host of things that we could talk about. And if we want to weave it throughout the year, and I know like March is Women's History Month. We don't have to follow convention. But one of the things that we can do to kind of expand the discourse is each month say, we're going to talk about this. Each month on Facebook, we're going to post about this. August or July could be the church and spirituality. There's a whole host of things that happen in our communities that we can talk about throughout the year. And if we control the narrative, we control the direction. If the Woodson Institute says this is what we're going to do, everybody's going to follow along because y'all are the ones that set the standard, a long time ago. So, when I've done it, I have enough topics for 2.5 years, just in terms of how I'm like, because there's so much to talk about within our life and with our experiences. We talk about relationships. If we did something on Black dating, it would be all over. We could talk about music and hip hop. Yeah. We have this whole spate of Black movies coming out.
Yeah.
There's Black literature we can talk about. So there's a whole host of things.
So much.
Right. So when we talk about, it's not just the oppression of our enslavement. Let's talk about the genius of our people and our art and our jazz and our athletes and, just all the different things that we have contributed to this country and to this world. It's so much. It's so much. And maybe every other week, we're going to talk about this week. We're going to talk about this next week. Let's talk about your ancestors. Post a picture of your elder one. It's just, we want to talk about all year. We have enough for 52 weeks.
Yeah.
We could do a top.
We're going to talk about it. Yeah. We're going to talk about it. And when we get off the phone and we get, like Dr. Mason said, we're on Facebook and we're talking about it amongst our homies, but we need white people to talk about it. You know what I mean? Well, we need, I can't remember who said it. And Dean Woodson, you could probably tell me who said it, but Black History Month or Black History Week wasn't created for us. It was created for white America to see the picture of who we are and that we are much more than what you have painted us out to be. Of course, we have transferred, internalized, and used it as a moment to celebrate who we are and to teach our children who they are and to highlight this month. And like Dr. Mason said, pay a little historian during February. We have definitely done that. But we also have to remember Black History Month. We try to tell you, look, I need to remind you, like I'm reminding you who I am. I'm reminding you of my history. This is what you're painting. This is what you're trying to paint in news. This is what you're trying to paint in the movies. You're trying to paint this single story of what it is to be Black in America. Mm-hmm. But no, this is where we get to say, this is for you to learn.
Yeah.
So I think that starts, I will say this, Dr. Mason, that Black History Month is lucrative. But after the George Floyd incident, all of a sudden corporations were asking me to do virtual diversity, equity, culturally competent virtual workshops, right? Yeah. And here comes the question. And our people, my millennial generation, we all got into it and we were ready and we're marching and all that. But corporations, white churches, you want me to come now? You wanted me to come in March and April and May. Where are you now?
Yeah.
Where were you before then? Like we can't.
The money.
Yeah. You're ready to pay me and you're ready to give me these consultant fees, but where are you now?
Yeah.
The media is quiet, so this is when you should be. This is when the emotion. You talked about the emotion and taking the emotion out of it and adding education to it. This is the time now when we begin to put action and not only just educating and focusing on our communities, white America, systemic oppressed America. This is when you learn about who I am, and you're going to have these authentic, raw conversations. And it's okay to be uncomfortable. You're going to be uncomfortable.
Well, Dr. Gilliam, about that school system in Utah that took away the teaching of Black studies. They said, we're not going to teach it. And I agree with you. Another important piece of Black studies is for other people to learn about who we are. But then if they don't want to, they're going to protest the teaching of it. They're going to lobby against it, and they're going to take their kids out of school. How do we deal with that?
I think, when we think, what was that county, that state that just did that? And they said was it Iowa?
Wasn't it Iowa said if you don't want to study this part, you can just
you can opt out of it. I think that's what they said. And then you have this coon of a man up in Michigan who is running for governor. Dr. Woodson, aren't you from Michigan?
Unfortunately, at this point.
And said one of the things he is going to do is to remove Black history so that it is not. So at any rate, we have to deal with all that foolishness and foolish people.
So to your point, Dr. Gilliam, and you have to excuse me, something's falling in my eye. Dr. Woodson started all of this because he was in grad school and they were studying history. When he asked where the history of his people was, the professor looked him in his face and said, we don't need to study that because your people don't have any history worth studying. And so when he started doing this work, his intent was to show everybody else that we did. So somehow we have just shifted this whole paradigm where we're proving to each other that we have history, and we're not really impacting the world in the way that we can. And so, that's part of the work. I have a BH12 initiative, and that's part of the work that we do, writing these congressmen, writing these state legislators, doing that work so that when you are in these classrooms and places, there's policy. Because, we're in a policy-driven country. Right. And if there's not policy, we can have every movement and thing we want to. We just saw it now. Black Lives Matter was rioting, and all the people need to be arrested, shot, and everything else. But they stormed the Capitol, and until they couldn't cover it up no more, it was a protest. Mm-hmm. So it all goes back to this, who is controlling the narrative? And we as a people need to control our own narrative.
Yeah. We do. And I think not only do we need to control our own narrative, that I think one of the good things, I work for President Brown, is that he has this motto that you do your work, I'm going to look out for you. That I'm going to as I climb, I'm going to lift you. Mm-hmm. And so it has to be important. It has to be imperative and conscious of that when I make it, that I'm bringing someone that looks like me along. And I'm not saying that you're happy. Of course, there's definitely people that don't necessarily look like me that are committed to the fight, but we have to be conscious of making sure that when I'm writing an article or when I'm writing a book, the next upcoming scholar gets to be my co-author, or that when I'm getting to sit in a spot or get to sit in a seat in higher ed, that the next person is a Black woman or a Black man who may not have that opportunity because who has historically in the past, when sitting at that table, has been white men and white women. And we have to collectively, I tell my students, we have to get back to giving the Black girl, when you see another Black girl and it's just you and her in the room, we have to go back to giving that acknowledgement, like, girl, I see you, I got you, nothing gonna happen because I'm here.
Yeah.
We have to get back to that. And I'm not saying that we've lost it all the way, but I think there has to be a sense of, we may not always get along as Black people. We may not always agree, but in a public setting, I got you.
Yeah.
Right.
I got your back.
Especially
when we in front of company.
Right.
I have your back.
I love how all of the sororities came together to support Kamala Harris. I just thought that was, yes, she is an AKA, but I thought it was just so magnificent and so majestic, that all of the sisters came together to support Vote, to march to the polls, to wear their chucks and pearls. I mean, I just thought it was a magnificent display of unity, and we have to get back to doing that more. There are too many things, I think, that divide us as a people. Okay, too many things that create these differences, and we have to get back to the basics. Oh, I hate to use that term, back to the basics, but we really do have to get back to just some of the basic things, because we are all interconnected together through experiences and stories that we can all relate to. And part of what I believe Dr. Woodson, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, was trying to do, in addition to telling a story of the accomplishments of Black people, we needed to know ourselves of our greatness, and I thank God that my teachers growing up celebrated Black History Month. I thank God for all of the posters and pictures that they used to put on the wall, and how we had to be a character, a Black character, and that kind of thing. And so all of these little things help us, overall. One final thing, my son, he was getting packages from Amazon. And I said, now, hey, wait a minute. What's going on? First of all, where are you getting money from? And I said, what's in these? I just didn't know. Open it up. The Nigerian flag, the Haitian
I love
flag,
it.
the Dominican, because he took the ancestry DNA test. And a while back, I walked him through his ancestry because his mother's from the Virgin Island. And he's ordering flags of the countries where he has DNA, and I said, oh God, thank you. I had a holy moment. I said, my son gets it. I think he's getting it. I didn't see it coming, but that's why we have to continue to be consistent with what we do and say to our students.
And that's what we also got to talk about, the diaspora.
The diaspora, that's right.
Yes, because when I get in front of my students and we talk about Haiti and we talk about Puerto Rico and Jamaica and Barbados, they are us. They are Black. They are us.
They are us.
The look, the shock, and that it's not just that the African experience was not just in Africa and this small. I said we are a tiny part of the diaspora in the United States. We are the world, and that's why it's important that we know our history, and this diaspora study and this inclusiveness. When you go to Brazil, that's your cousin, that's your people.
Listen. Cuba.
Yeah, that's us.
England,
Jamaica, you name it.
Central America, Mexico.
That's right. Yes. We got cousins down there as well.
That's us.
I say that too. I was like, your cousins.
Dr. Woodson had a quote and of course terminology is time sensitive. If the Negro in the ghetto must eternally be fed by the hand that pushes him into the ghetto, he will never become strong enough to get out of the ghetto.
Mm-hmm.
So in the final segment, as we move to our close, I just want to discuss our community. I'm from Detroit, so we had a lot of Black businesses and things, and I clearly live in Atlanta, and every time I look up, there's another one. But what Black sometimes is the same excellence that we do the other thing. Or, as I told a friend of mine, when we have challenges with our businesses, our solution is to stop going.
Mm.
But if we have a problem at Macy's, we might go off on the whole clerk, but we're going to be back at Macy's next week.
Mm.
So I just want to take a few minutes as we close and discuss your thoughts on really what Black excellence is.
You, me,
Right.
you're Black excellence. I'm Black excellence. I think about I live in Kentucky. My parents are military. I was born in Richmond County, Georgia, Augusta.
Shout out to Augusta.
AUG. So I think about that. I've lived all over the southern part of the United States, Louisiana, Mississippi. And I think about that. And I think that Dr. Woodson, because you're in Atlanta and you're from Detroit, that is such a, what is the word I'm looking for? I'm envious.
Right.
That you get all those options of Black businesses. You know what I mean? And I think that is something that I definitely don't take for granted. I have one. There's one Black pediatric dentist I live in a nice sized city too. I live in Lexington,
Right.
Lexington, Kentucky. There is one Black pediatric dentist, and he's booked all the time because the few Black, or not a few, it's a nice 20% is Black middle class here. We all go to this Black dentist.
Wow.
Because we want our kids to see this Black dentist. So I think that when we talk about Black excellence, we have to be committed to it. And so we're gonna make mistakes. I'm gonna make a mistake. And if I was editing or you invited me to your church to speak, and if that day I wasn't on my A game, just know that it's still Black excellence that exudes in me. Give me grace, forgive me, and invite me back. Now, the second time, if I'm still messing up, pull me to the side and tell me what's going on. But give me grace and forgive me and invite me back and realize that we are a beautiful people, but not a perfect people.
Yeah.
Well, it's so great to hear all these people talk about their upbringing, and I haven't really spoken about mine, but I was so blessed. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina.
Hey.
My father was an editor of Carolina Times Black newspaper, and then he was head of advertising PR for North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance.
Mm.
All I saw were Black businesses and Black banks and the Black bookstore and North Carolina Central University and Winston-Salem State and Shaw and the homecoming and A&T and the Aggie. Mm-hmm. This is back homecoming when you have to dress to go to homecoming. So we were so cool when I was in third grade. My dad had the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People. We lived in a Black neighborhood. So I saw my parents both went to HBCUs. So all my whole life, I just saw Black businesses, Black excellence, Black banks. My sister and I, we were like, well, of course we're going to we moved to Atlanta. When I finished college, my sister moved there, and we would go across town to go to Pascal's. We would go across town to go to Chicago. We go across town to go to the Black dry cleaners because that's how we were raised. You support your Black businesses. Mm-hmm. So it's ingrained. And I thought every place in the world was like Durham. Mm-hmm. And when I left Atlanta and I went to teach at Central State and I was in Dayton, so I was like, well, where are the Black bookstores? And where are the Black And it threw me for a loop to know that the rest of America was not like Durham. Where you just don't see Black excellence everywhere you look. Where all my parents' friends and people I babysat for, and some people went to A&T and some people went to Central, but it was still, worked at Hillside High School and Durham High. I mean, it was just Black excellence everywhere. So it's been very hard for me as an adult person to live in communities where that's just not the norm, and it's an adjustment. It really has been difficult for me. If I'm living in Atlanta, of course, but in other towns where I've lived, you're like, wow. And you see the impact that it has. When I was teaching at Central State, But my students were coming from small town Ohio, Indiana, and you just don't have that same sense of what's possible because you didn't grow up seeing what was possible. And that's the strength and the beauty of Black communities and dynamic Black towns like like Detroit and Atlanta and Durham. But it's also sad because you realize that the rest of our young people aren't getting that. And one of the things I think we can do to maintain excellence or really to have an impact on our communities, I think we have to have a more strategic approach to some of the things that are happening in our communities. In terms of being laser focused, just pick a block, pick an area, pick a housing project and say, look, we're going to wrap our arms around you as an organization, as an entity, as a sorority, what have you, and say, we want you to do better. We want you to be better. We're this gang activity. We're going to get you young people out of gangs. We're going to get you into some sort of programs. This teenage pregnancy issue, these drug issues, whatever's happening that's detrimental to our community, we really have to have a more conservative and strategic approach to those areas which need us the most. And it's not just us as Black scholars, but all of us who are Black leaders in our various industries really have to, the drug dealers took over. That's what I used to tell people. I said, the drug dealers can take over our communities. We can take over our communities. And we really have to have a more, like I said, a strategic or planned approach to say, we're going to take our communities back, really. So that's how we maintain and promote Black excellence, to be that example. And, I'm so proud and so blessed that I grew up in that community because, my parents had books. My high school had one, we had a year of Black studies. And you find out that it is sadness that the rest of the country doesn't have that. But when you have that, to me, it's kind of fortified who I am and fortified my friends and family. Growing up, everybody was going to a college. Everybody was going to school. It didn't matter your socioeconomic background as a Black person because you live in a state that had so many Black colleges. You can go somewhere. So, I was blessed to have that experience, and I just really wish we can translate that and really promote our Black communities, no matter where you live. If you're living in Dayton, Ohio, or if you're living in Lexington or whatever small, we really got to shore up our entrepreneurs and our business people and really, have that excellence be just commonplace as opposed to being rare.
Yeah.
And Dr. Mason, I know you're next. But isn't there a role that HBCUs can play in advocating for a continuing Black excellence?
Absolutely. Without a doubt. Shout out to Brother Waylon Matoya. I haven't seen him in years. It's so good to see his name. He is Black excellence. Black excellence is an attitude. It's a way of life. You may have little, but you're proud of what you have, and you carry it, the comportment, and you fix yourself up with what you have. Black excellence is staring at you in the mirror every morning, and pushing you to go out and to try to do and be the very best. Black excellence is recognizing your shortcomings, but also recognizing that you got some gifts that God has given you. Black excellence is those kids in church who have not memorized the Easter speech or forget words of the song, but somebody in the congregation said, "That's all right, baby. You go on."
Excellence.
Okay, that's Black excellence because they're still pushing you towards greatness. So, Dr. Gilliam, when we strike out in speeches, and I'm a pastor and I preach Sunday after Sunday, and every now and then, some Sunday I say, "Oh Lord, what in the world did I just say to these folks?" Okay. But Black excellence is when that member texts you, and when you think you've had the worst sermon, she texts you or he texts you and say, "Pastor, that was the best sermon you've ever preached." That's Black excellence. So it is a state of mind, and it is recognizing that we are people of diversity, rich cultures, that we have exposure to things. And so what we have to do is because everyone is born differently. They may not have the support. They may not have the parental engagement, but there's still excellence. And that's the genius of teaching, and I grew up the son of a teacher. I grew up the son of college graduates. My parents went to Morris Brown, but I recall my mother just having such a way with her kids. She taught in elementary school. We all helped her put bulletin boards together every year. Okay, you remember those days when you walked into the room and it was just a cornucopia of bulletin boards, you know, and beautiful cutout letters and all of that kind of stuff, because she wanted to create a sense of Black excellence in the classroom, you know, that these students had the potential to learn. And so it's a state of mind. It's a state of mind. Black excellence was watching Dr. Woodson direct the Payne College Choir. Oh my goodness. And pulling out from those young people sounds and melodies and melodious tunes that they perhaps didn't even think that they could. And that's a celebration of Black excellence. And so when we get it in our mind that we are capable, you know, of being excellent, then we will be on our way in this beautiful journey called life.
That was good.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me on this panel this evening. I'm getting texts and everything, so everything over here is lighting up and chiming. People are really enjoying it, and I'm so glad to have the three of you on, and I will certainly be utilizing you all in the future. So thank you so much.
So the first time is free, but we're going to send you invoices the next time. I'm just joking. I'm just kidding.
And if you all need me, you know, reach out. You know, I don't mind at all. But stay with me, and I'll be right back with you.
All right.
So I hope everyone enjoyed this as much as I did. I love having, you know, diverse thoughts and diverse perspectives as we discuss topics that are a part of who we are as a people. I do have to do a couple of things, or my team will have a problem. First, if you would like to help us continue this work, please go to my website, rwaynewoodson.com, and donate. These shows are not without expense, and so we want to make sure that we can continue this program. I have been so fortunate that my guests have donated their services, but we still have additional costs that we must cover when we do these shows. And finally, if you would like to connect with me, these are my social media handles. It's Dr. Woodson 2020 on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So make sure you connect and join us as we continue these discussions. I hope everyone has an amazing evening. Thank you for joining, and share this video after we are concluded. Have a great evening, everybody.